evening. I'm glad you're here. In 111 AD, a man named Pliny wrote a letter to the emperor of the Roman Empire at that time, who was Emperor Trajan. Pliny was the governor of an area of the empire called Bithynia, which is in Asia Minor, which is in modern-day Turkey today. And he had been investigating some claims made about Christians in his area of authority. So he investigated these Christians to see what they were all about, what they were up to, and if they were any kind of a threat. They had been persecuted as rebels for refusing to worship the emperor. So this man Pliny, this governor, did a thorough investigation, and he found that there really wasn't that great of a threat. His result of his investigation said that he simply found that they met on a certain day, which would have been Sunday. They met on a certain day of the week to sing and pray and to share a simple meal together and to encourage one another. That was pretty much the gist of it. And I thought that was a pretty good estimation of what the church is supposed to do. Certainly there's more to it than that. But those elements are things that are very important. But this governor did an investigation on the church. And what I want to suggest to you tonight is that the life of a Christian should be one of self-investigation. We should be asking questions. We should be examining things and evaluating. We should examine our faith. We should examine our motives. And above all, we should be examining the Scriptures to shed light on those matters, because we need to be using the Word of God as a guide to ask questions of ourselves and of the church and even of God. Now, a good investigator will ask standard questions. They will ask things like who, what, where, why, and how. But if you turn with me to Hebrews chapter 10 this evening, Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 24, we'll see how this passage helps answer some questions about how the church relates to itself. Hebrews chapter 10, beginning in verse 24. And let us consider one another, in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much more as you see the day approaching. Now, reading through there, you might think, well, there's not a whole lot of that in there, Rob, that you just mentioned, but there really is, and that's what we're going to break this down and look at this evening. And we'll see how this passage, how it teaches us the who, the where, the why, the when, the how, of the way that we must work together as a church family toward this goal of encouraging one another. Now, yes, we as the church, we offer worship to God, we do many other things, but I would say that one of the most important things we do as a church, and one of the most important things that this passage is teaching about the gathering of the church, is that we encourage one another. So we'll answer these questions about how that is all accomplished. The first question that we're going to look at requires some very serious thought. First phrase we might consider this evening is where the Hebrew writer says, consider one another. This would answer the who question. Who? All right, consider one another. Well, the one another is the who. And the word consider means to think very hard. It means to examine thoroughly, deeply meditate, carefully consider these things. But not just to think about them, but of course to put that thought into action. We need to think, and then we need to act. David wrote in Psalm 41 and verse 1, "Blessed is he who considers the poor." So David is saying, one who considers the poor, that man will be blessed. And he's not talking about someone who says, let me think about the poor for a minute. They don't have a lot of stuff. They're poor. Their lives are hard. Interesting. That's not the kind of thought and consideration that he's thinking about. That would be a part of it, but it can't end there. We must recognize needs through this consideration, and then we must act in order to meet them. This passage is talking directly to you. Yes, you. And it's also talking to me. I need my mirror up here. But this passage is speaking on a very individual level. Consider one another. Now that doesn't mean that we are being nosy with our fellow members, but it means that we're just interested in their lives, that we are involved in their lives, that we ask them frequently, what's going on? How are things going? Having some trouble, can I help? That's what we mean by this. Romans 12:15, Paul wrote that Christians need to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. We have to know each other a little bit to share those things. Paul also wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 in that great illustration about the body of the church, speaking of it as a physical body with different members and parts. And he says, when one member suffers, all suffer. You know, if I've got a headache, the rest of me doesn't feel that great either. It has an effect. When one member suffers, all suffer. When one member rejoices, all should rejoice. This is part of what's involved in this seemingly simple instruction to consider one another. We need to be spending some thought and then some action regarding this, because once we know each other more intimately, we will be better equipped to encourage one another. And that's really at the heart of this passage again. The next question we want to answer is the why question. Why should we do this? In order to stir up love and good works. This is all related to the church meeting together regularly to do these things. One of the reasons why we meet together is to stir up love and good works. So let's look at each of those individually. Stirring up love. What does this mean? Well, thinking good of the brethren. We think of love as being a positive feeling, a good feeling, but it may just simply mean focusing on the positive, choosing to do so. Showing love perhaps to the unlovable. Every single one of us sitting in here becomes unlovable at times, some more than others. But it's stressing the idea that we need to have patience with each other. We need to stir up love for one another, and one way we do that is by meeting together regularly. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, that wonderful passage about love. 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 4 describes what love does. Again, not what it is, but what it does. It's something that is put in action. It's a feeling in action. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. There are many beautiful statements in that passage, and there are many hard statements. Many of those things are really difficult to do on a regular basis. What is meant by this idea that love covers a multitude of sins? That love will just wash those things away and we can pretend like they don't happen. That's not necessarily what is at root there, I would suggest. The idea that love covers a multitude of sins. We all have them. But what love will do is hide them from view. Not that we ignore them and pretend they don't exist, but we don't focus on them. We don't focus only on the bad, which is so tempting and so easy to do. Nothing is easier than sitting back and armchair quarterbacking and nitpicking about all the things that are wrong with someone else's life. If we're practicing love, then love is going to help us to look past those things. Again, not with the idea of ignoring them, pretending they don't exist, but realizing that there's more there than just our mistakes. We certainly would want people to look at us that way. Not only focus on the things we've done wrong, but the good too. That is something that love does. It must be stirred up. Stir up one another to love and good works. What about good works? Now, we could get into trouble here with the idea of works. What we're talking about here is works of obedience, not works of merit for salvation. We are saved by grace and not by works. That is, that we can never earn our salvation. We can never do enough good deeds to merit and earn our way to heaven. It was a gift that was given freely. Now, because we have been saved, we will then exercise those works. We will do those things out of a sense of gratitude, out of a sense of obligation, and a desire to please God. There's a big difference between the two. The good works that are being talked about here are not the cause of salvation, but rather they are referred to as the fruits of salvation. They are the natural outgrowth. Since we're saved, we will do these things. Again, out of gratitude, out of appreciation, out of love for God and for our fellow men. Well, like what? What's this look like in nuts and bolts here? Good works towards the members. It could mean just simply caring for them, meeting some of those needs. It could also extend to benevolence that is given to those outside the body. It means celebrating and encouraging people who do this regularly, those who are very good at seeing needs and meeting needs and being encouragers and being positive and uplifting to others. It means telling those people, I appreciate your spirit. Thank you for always looking for the good in people. It helps me to be a little better at that. It means living and practicing our faith everywhere we go. Those are good works to engage in. And it means pushing one another to do this. Again, where the church is meeting together to encourage one another to do these things. We're encouraging one another to do better at this. We all have good days and bad days at this. It means being accountable to one another. That's some of the things that would be involved in stirring up good works in each other. And they have to be stirred up. Because love dies down over time. And it must be rekindled. It can't always burn at that hot fever pitch. It has to be rekindled. This is my 23rd wedding anniversary today. I still love my wife. I still think we get along well. But you know, 23 years, it takes a little thought sometimes. It takes a little effort. It doesn't come quite as easily as it did. Got to be a little more creative. I'm not purely talking about romantic love here, but that's just by way of illustration. We have to keep working at it, or it will just fade away. That love has to be rekindled. When we're talking about good works, that also have to be stirred up. Enthusiasm for good works fades very quickly sometimes, especially when that work is very difficult. We're going to gather together on a Saturday morning and we're going to go door knocking out in the neighborhood. We've got our flyers and we're going to go and talk to people and invite them. And the first few doors, man, you're raring to go, and the sun gets up a little hotter, a little warmer, and a little further between houses, and you get a little tired, and you know you've had doors slammed in your face and nobody's interested, and your enthusiasm can wane pretty quickly. Or when the results of whatever work we're engaged in are very slow. Or if it's something that's very long term. You know, we like instant gratification. We want to see an instant turnaround. If we don't see that, we tend to get discouraged. So we are to encourage one another. Hey, keep at it. This is a good thing we're doing here. Just hang in there and it'll all work out. Sometimes you feel like you're beating your head against the wall. That can be very discouraging when you really don't see any results or any hope of results. This is where we come in and encourage one another. We've got to stay at it. We've got to keep at it. Now, I would say that love, or neither love nor good works, occurs naturally and easily. They have to be stirred up, just like if you've got chocolate milk mix. Stirring it up and you make some chocolate milk. If you just leave that sitting on the counter, it's going to settle down at the bottom, and you've got to stir it back up. Everything will kind of settle down to the bottom if it's not agitated, if it's not stirred up and worked up. So something we do when we meet together on a regular basis is to stir up love and good works in one another. Well, where do we go to accomplish this? Well, we're right here. The next phrase you want to consider back in Hebrews 10:24 and 25 is not forsaking the assembly. Now we could get into an area of great misunderstanding and misapplication of this as far as church attendance and things like that. I want to avoid that and really take more of a general approach to this. But going back to the questions that we're asking as good investigators, this answers the where and the how part of our faith and how we are to relate to one another as a church family. If we're going to encourage one another, if we're going to show our love, if we're going to engage in these works and stir these things up and encourage one another in this, we're going to have to be around each other regularly. It's not going to be, we can't meet once quarterly and expect to have these deep personal relationships. It's just not going to happen. So we need to meet regularly and be around each other frequently in order to be a positive influence on one another. You know, there are people that are very good at things I'm very weak in. I need them to rub off on me a little bit. Well, I've got to rub up next to them if that's going to happen. And it helps us when we're meeting regularly to know the needs of each person. Sundays are one time that we have this opportunity to meet together. Sometimes it'll happen where somebody is missing for a few weeks. Hasn't really happened here, but other places that I've been, you know, somebody will be missing for several weeks, and somebody will just say, "Hey, where's so-and-so? I haven't seen them in a while." They say, "Oh yeah, I need to get a hold of them." So I'll call them up, and I would say, "Hey, what's been going on? We haven't seen you for a few weeks." And say, well, I was in the hospital, and nobody came to visit me, and I got upset, so I just haven't came." Well, nobody knew you were in the hospital. You know, maybe you should have told somebody so we could have engaged in that. But see, somebody gets all bent out of shape because, and then they're losing that benefit. They're losing that relationship. It's something we've got to work at. It's something that may not come easy or naturally. I'm not just limiting this to visiting or chatting or, you know, socializing with each other, but that's certainly part of it. It's not just about connecting with one another, though. Another important reason that we meet together is to reconnect with God, specifically through the Word of God. One thing that we do when we meet together every week is we look at God's Word together. It means reading it. It means learning it, or relearning it, many times is the case. It means remembering what we may have forgotten in the past week, which also happens frequently. You know, we get busy. In 2 Peter, I'm always encouraged when I read in Peter's second epistle that he is writing to Christians, and he has no doubt of their faith. He has no doubt of their faith and their belief and their commitment to Christ. They're suffering persecution, and they're going through all of these difficult times, and Peter is encouraging them, but he says, "I do this to remind you." He said, "I want to bring this to your remembrance." And he even says, although you know it, Peter is saying, I know you guys know this because you live it, but I still think it's a good thing for me to remind you, just in case you may start forgetting. And he says something very relevant in 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 1 with what we're talking about tonight. He says, Peter writes and he says, "I think it is good to stir you up by way of reminder." What we just talked about, stirring up one another to love and good works. So Peter is right on the same page here. He said that's something that we do when we come together. Reminding one another. It's a chance for us to recommit ourselves to obeying the Word of God. We did that at one time. We continue to do that. And we're constantly needing to recommit ourselves to that. We're constantly needing to submit ourselves to God's will all over again and again and again. Because we are His possessions. We owe Him everything. He's done everything for us. It's a time for us to remember things that we may have neglected. All good things to be engaged in here. In this passage back in Hebrews chapter 10, there is a very peculiar word that's used here. When the Hebrew writer encourages Christians not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together, is the way the New King James renders it. The assembling of ourselves together. That word is a very big compound word. In the original Greek, it's the word episunagogian. You may hear a little bit in there the root word for synagogue. That's where we get the word synagogue, is from this Greek word. But there's a connection to it there. And it's peculiar because this is not the usual word that is translated in the New Testament referring to the assembly or the church, or what we would call, a Sunday worship assembly. That word is usually the Greek word ekklesia, which means the called out. It's a generic word for assembly that's usually used for the church gathering. So this strange word here, Why was this word chosen? Can't say definitively. I'll offer you a suggestion perhaps that maybe this word was used here to include gathering together for the purpose of worship, but it may also have been chosen for a more general reference for us being together, often for many different reasons, not just for worship. There are many times when congregations gather together for different things. Often there is a ladies' Bible class on a certain day of the week. Or sometimes the men get together and have a men's breakfast, once a week or once a month or whatever. We have game nights. Those are always fun, times of fellowship. We have a fellowship meal once a month. We have celebrations. We just had the going away party for Bob and Glenn Graber. That was a wonderful time for us to gather together. But all of these things that we do make us closer as a family. The only other place in the New Testament that word that I just mentioned is used is in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 1. And there it refers to the gathering, the assembling of the saints at Jesus' second coming. So there's planting a seed for further study on your part. And I think the word is telling us something very important. And there's also a connection with the next question that we're going to look at, which is when? All of these things, we gather together, we encourage one another, we stir up love and good works, we remind each other of things that we need to be remembering, and the Hebrew writer says we need to do this all the more as the day approaches. What day is the writer talking about there? He's talking about the last day, Judgment Day. As that day approaches, we need to be doing this more and more. When should we start doing this? Well, we need to start doing it right now, yesterday we might say. Jesus is coming soon, morning or night or noon, as the song goes. We don't know. Acts chapter 17 and verse 31 firmly states that God has fixed a day on which he will judge the world. We need to recognize something, not with fear and trepidation, but just with a sense of realism that the clock on this world is ticking down. Every day that passes is one day closer to the last day. So we need to be preparing for that. I would suggest to you that we need encouragement now more than ever. In 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 and 4, Peter wrote this letter, we think, probably in the early 60s of the first century. And he said, there's scoffers out there. He said, there are people that are doubters, that are mockers, and they say, oh, you Christians, you're just being fooled. Jesus isn't coming back. The world's not going to be destroyed. And they're saying everything is just going like it has been. Everything since the beginning of creation is just working right the same as it has all the way through today. Same old. Nothing's new. That was in the first century. Are we not even more impatient 2,000 years later? Well, Jesus is coming back any second now, but it's been 2,000 years. God operates on a different timetable than we do many times. But we need this same encouragement. If they needed it in Peter's day, Peter is saying, hang in there. Look for Christ. He's coming. Be ready. Be prepared. Encourage one another. Get ready for this day. We need to do it now more than ever. We're 2,000 years closer to that actually happening. We think sometimes of the persecution of the church in the early centuries and how vicious and terrible it was. And we rightly should consider the things that we might suffer as to be pretty mild. But persecution is occurring. If not here in America, certainly in places of the world, but even here. We're seeing its reach. It seems to be growing. It seems to be ratcheting up, little by little, every day, every month, every year. We see a further encroachment by the government on Christianity, on the free expression of religion. There's talk about removing tax status from churches and minister salaries. This gets me a little close to home. But they're saying, well, churches don't need to be tax exempt. Well, they're just another organization like any other. Why should they be special? And there is the forcing of participation in sinful activities by laws and procedures that are passed by legislatures. forcing Christians to participate in things. You know, you've got the baker in Colorado, the florist up in Washington, and these things, and it just keeps kind of creeping up. It just keeps getting a little bit deeper, a little bit darker every day. Tolerance is the watchword of the day. Tolerance forbids preaching the whole counsel of God. Well, you can't tell people that have a different lifestyle than you that they're not going to heaven. Well, that's mean. That's not nice. Therefore, we're going to prevent you from saying that, and we'll throw you in jail if you do. Some people may say that as an overreaction, but I feel the day is coming, and maybe not too far away. Everywhere there's a spirit of militant atheism that is bent on shouting down Christians. Keep your faith to yourself. So in this time, we have to stick together. We have to encourage one another. We have to lift our spirits. Who can offer better comfort than another child of God? If you're suffering for your faith, you don't need a psychologist. You don't need an investment advisor. Who do you want and need most around you when you're suffering trials? Do you want those who are telling you to blame others, or to get even with them, or to just give up? Or do you want those around you telling you to persevere and to lean on the Lord, and to draw closer to Him and keep your eyes on heaven? That's who you want around you. Those are the voices you want to surround you. Who is it that understands better the coming reward when Jesus does return? Paul instructs the Thessalonian church to encourage one another with his words about the second coming. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, he tells them, we have hope not like those who are without hope, who said that when you're dead, that's it. We have a hope beyond the grave. We have a hope of redemption. We have a hope of being taken to heaven with Jesus when He comes in glory and victory. And he tells the church, encourage one another with these words. Remind each other about this. Talk about it. Think about it. Pray about it. We do not sorrow as those who have no hope beyond the grave. And that is something that we share as a family. And we ought to encourage one another about that. Family, to me, is one of the best aspects of the church, of the body of Christ. The family atmosphere. It's one of the great appeals. It was certainly something that really struck my heart in my own conversion, to see the way the congregation I was involved with loved each other and helped each other and encouraged each other. It was something that I hadn't seen before, and it was very attractive to me. Jesus says in Mark chapter 10 and verse 28, after Peter and the apostles have said, look, Lord, we've left everything to follow you. Look, we've left our fishing business. We've left our livelihood. We've left our families and our homes to come and follow you. And Jesus said, I tell you the truth. Anyone who has given up things for me, land and jobs and family and husbands and wives and children, anyone who has given those things up, you will receive more, even 100-fold, both now and in the kingdom. I've been talking with people sometimes who came from a background where their conversion to Christ was going to cause a problem. We've been talking about this on Sunday mornings in our Bible class about personal evangelism. And there are some people who will say just flat out, well, if I convert to Christianity, my family will disown me. Or I will just break my grandmother's heart, and she'll never talk to me again. And I always share this verse with them, Mark 10:28, where Jesus says, if you lose family for His sake, you'll gain family, even more. And you will. You'll have brothers and sisters, millions all around the world, who love us and who seek after our best interest. So let's take advantage of our relationship together. And let's use it to help each other get through this messy, trouble-filled life. I love the old Motown song, Lean on Me. It's always encouraging when I hear it. It's just a good song to begin with. But the message is always something that really touched me. Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on. Because it won't be long until I'm going to need somebody to lean on. And that's what we do. We have good days, we have bad days. I hope when I'm having a bad day, somebody else is having a good day and can share that with me. And then I can turn around and do that for them as well. Lift them up when they're down, so they can lift me up when I'm down. We need to encourage one another so that when we are down and discouraged, others will come to pick us up. Maybe you're sitting here tonight and you haven't had that kind of support from your family or from your circle of friends. You haven't? Then I encourage you to come and experience the wonderful blessing of being in God's family. A family that will last throughout all eternity. And you enter that family, you become a child of God by obeying the gospel commands. You believe in His Son, to repent of sin, to confess Jesus as Lord, and be baptized, immersed in water that your sins might be washed away. If you have that need of the church, or if we can pray for you, if we can encourage you, if we can be that family for you, let us know how. Tell us tonight, and we'll do that for you. Please come and make that need known as we stand and sing this song.